Good evening. I'm now going to do a short talk, a shortish talk, which will be a synopsis of the Voice of the Silence, which was written by, of course, by H.P. Blavatsky, and it's going to be a kind of overview of the Voice of the Silence and the three fragments from the Voice of the Silence, and also something about how it was written, and also what certain people had to say about it. Certain people from different walks of life had to say about it. So The Voice of the Silence was one of H.P.'s last productions, published in 1889, and was dedicated to the few real mystics in the society. She wrote to members of the esoteric section saying, "Read the voice, I say. It was written for and dedicated to you, by Master's special orders." And even the current Dalai Lama says, "I believe that this book has strongly influenced many sincere seekers and aspirants to the wisdom and compassion of the Bodhisattva path." And it is thought that the teachings are purely Buddhistic, but H.P. Blavatsky states that the Voice of the Silence, tiny book though it is simply becoming the Theosophist's Bible. They are grand aphorisms, indeed, I may say so, because I did not invent them. I only translated them from Telugu, the oldest South Indian dialect. There are 3 treatises about morals and the moral principles of the Mongolian and Dravidian mystics. Some of the aphorisms are wonderfully deep and beautiful. Here they have created a perfect furor, and I think they would attract attention in Russia too. And in the preface to the Voice, she states, "The Book of the Golden Precepts, some of which are pre-Buddhistic, while others belong to a later date, contains about 90 distinct little treatises. Of these I learnt 39 by heart, years ago." So she thought these would be sufficient to use in the West. The rest would be too much for us at the moment, or at that time when it was written. But hundreds of Buddhist sutras and teachings have been translated since, so maybe some of the other 51 are included in them somewhere. So The Voice of the Silence was written by H.P. Blavatsky while she was in Fontainebleau in France, and first published, as said, in 1889. Translated from the Book of the Golden Precepts, which shares a common origin with The Secret Doctrine and The Light on the Path by Mabel Collins. The rules and ethics presented there contrast the 2 paths of spiritual attainment, the one pursued by those seeking knowledge for their own enlightenment, the Pratyeka Buddhas, the other chosen by those whose aspirations are prompted by compassion for all, who are the Bodhisattvas. D.T. Suzuki, the famous Zen teacher, wrote, "Undoubtedly, Madame Blavatsky had in some way been initiated into the deeper side of Mahayana teaching, and then gave out what she deemed wise to the Western world." He also commented, "Here is the real Mahayana Buddhism." B.T. Chang, who was the interpreter and one of the secretaries of the Tashi Lama. Now the Tashi Lama is also known as the Panchen Lama. Exoterically, he is regarded as being inferior to the Dalai Lama, but esoterically he is actually superior. He deals more with the spiritual side of the teachings, whereas the Dalai Lama deals more with the exoteric and political and secular things to do with Tibetan Buddhism. So, and B.T. Chang says, "Having appended a Chinese note to the end of this book, I am further requested by the editors to write a few lines in English. I deem it an honour and a privilege to do so, and offer herewith a recapitulation of what I have set forth in Chinese. Since its translation into English from the Tibetan by Madame H.P. Blavatsky in 1890, although it was actually published in 1889, but maybe it was that's when he actually came upon it, perhaps. This little book, the gem of Buddhist teachings, has enjoyed a wide circulation among Europeans and Americans interested in Buddhism. There is therefore little need for me to recommend it to foreign readers, except to point out that what is embodied in it comprises a part of the teachings of the esoteric school. What strikes me most in the opening chapters is the sentence, "The mind, i.e. the lower mind, is the great slayer of the real. Let the disciple slay the slayer." These are the words that sound the keynote of the Buddha's teachings. Time and again the Buddha commands his disciples to suppress the activities of the lower mind for the benefit of the higher self. Because anything and everything in the exterior universe consists of nothing but sense impressions created by one's lower mind, which is apt to lead the aspirant astray. The disciple should not seek truth elsewhere, but should try to find it within himself. He will then be able to hear the voice of the silence, or in the language of the Chinese Buddhists, the divine voice of the self. Traditions say that Avalokiteshvara attained the state of a bodhisattva after hearing the divine voice of the self, and this doctrine is greatly revered by the Chinese, who got it from the Sanskrit. Madame Blavatsky had a profound knowledge of Buddhist philosophy, and the doctrines she promulgated were those of many great teachers. This book is like a call to men, and women of course, to forsake desire, dispel every evil thought, and enter the true path. In Fragment Two, the passage which likens the mind to a mirror sounds exactly like what is stated in the Chuan Teng Lu, a Chinese Buddhist work of renown. This allegory also may have its own origin in some Sanskrit work, from which it found its way into both Chinese and Tibetan Buddhist works, or more probably, the Tibetans have derived it from a Chinese source. In this materialistic world, the majority of people, especially Europeans and Americans, always absurdly regard Buddhism as a system of philosophy which advocates nothing but passivity and inactivity. A perusal of this book will certainly dispel such mistaken notions from the minds of even the most sceptical. It has been suggested to me that for the benefit of the Chinese Buddhist, this work should be translated into Chinese. I quite agree with this idea, but pressure of work has hitherto prevented me from writing more than these few lines. Although they form an inadequate recognition of the merit of this book, I offer them because of my great reverence for its teachings, and I hope to be able to undertake the translation at some future date, future time, and that's was written in Peking, which is now Beijing, July 1927. So the idea of entering the silence appears in many traditions throughout the world. Sri Shankaracharya, the great Hindu sage, writes or states, "The wise should always be one with that silence, wherefrom words, together with the mind, turn back without reaching it, but which is attainable by the yogins." So it's only when we shut out the noise from the lower realms of being that we can tune in to the higher self. In the Surangama Sutra, it's stated, talking about the Gathas by Bodhisattva Manjushri, "Reverently I declare to the Tathagata what Avalokiteshvara said. And he said, when one dwells in silence, rolls of drums in 10 directions. All can be simultaneously heard. Thus is hearing complete." Very profound. So sometimes when we're in the city, we can hear the silence amidst the noise and rush. Just sitting in a cafe, we can enter the centre of the storm where all is peace, despite the cacophony around us. It's almost as if the whole world slowed down. So to enter the silence, we don't necessarily have to be in peaceful surroundings, but it makes things easier. But the real test is to find this silence in noisy surroundings, both inner and outer. It is a sign of progress to be able to find this silence despite the noise. But the highest level is not even to be aware of the external and internal noise. That's the highest level we can achieve. So now I'm going to do a brief synopsis of the 3 fragments. And so the first fragment is titled The Voice of the Silence, and starts off by warning us of the dangers of the lower idis or siddhis, the lower psychic powers that so bewitch many in the spiritualistic and New Age movement. Nowadays, we need to develop the higher spiritual powers. In fact, the greatest power is to go within and cultivate dharana, which is the intense and perfect concentration of the mind upon some one interior object, accompanied by complete abstraction from everything pertaining to the external universe or the world of the senses. When we clear all the psychic clouds from our being, we are in tune with nada, the soundless sound. Kabir, the mystic poet, describes this as the unstruck sound, which to me is a very evocative statement. So we have to still the mind. The lower aspects of our mind blinds us to our true self. And the Theosophical masters tell us that it is upon the serene and placid surface of the unruffled mind that the visions gathered from the invisible find a representation in the visible world. Otherwise you would vainly seek those visions, those flashes of sudden light, which have already helped to solve so many of the minor problems, and which alone can bring the truth before the eye of the soul. It is with jealous care that we have to guard our mind plane from all the adverse influences which daily arise in our passage through earth life. So, the first step is not to be consumed by the sights and sounds and thoughts of the material self and the material world, but to focus attention within, to realise, as the Mahachohan, who's the Master's Master, says in his letter, all of us have to get rid of our own ego, the illusory, apparent self, to recognise our true self in a transcendental, divine life. All of us have to get rid of our own ego, the illusory, apparent self, to recognise our true self in a transcendental, divine life. Well, that says it all, doesn't it? Again, we are told that there are 3 halls to pass through. The first being the hall of ignorance, or sorrow, which is this earthly life. It is the plane on which we suffer, and wherein are set along the path of dire probations, traps to ensnare the ego by the delusion called the Great Heresy. This great dire heresy is that of separateness, that causes so much suffering. It causes so much suffering in this world, because we do not realise that inwardly we are all one. The second is the hall of probationary learning. It is the astral world, so-called, where we have to be careful not to be ensnared by the alluring visions we see there, because these can bewitch us, and so many nowadays mistake the lower psychic visions for spiritual ones, and they refer to this lower psychism as spirit. This is the case with some spiritualism and many New Age movements, though there are some genuine ones in both cases. We can only generalise. It is only in the third hall, the hall of wisdom, that one realises full spiritual consciousness. It is only when we reach this state that we can call ourselves safe. So we are now told that the self of matter and the self of spirit can never meet. One of the twain must disappear. There's no place for both. So we have to give ourselves totally to the spiritual path if we are to succeed. We have to begin to think and act as we truly are, spiritual beings on an earthly journey. We have to become the path itself. It is an inner journey. The path is within, and we must always remember that we must be working to get rid of this great dire heresy of separateness that weans us from the rest, and therefore developing compassion. We are told not to look behind, not to become swallowed up by past thoughts and images and memories, or indeed expectations of the future. We need to live in the now, the present moment, because that is all there ever is. So the secret doctrine says the present is the child of the past, the future the begotten of the present. And yet, O present moment, knowest thou not that thou hast no parent, nor canst thou have a child, that thou art ever begetting but thyself? Before thou hast even begun to say, I am the progeny of the departed moment, the child of the past, thou hast become that past itself. Before thou utterest the last syllable, behold, thou art no more the present, but verily that future. Thus are the past, the present and the future, the ever-living Trinity in one, the Mahamaya of the Absolute is. So we have to merge all our senses into one sense, the seventh, and gain the power to perceive formless spiritual essences by intuitive means, beyond the range and reach of thought. All the time we are in danger from Mara, who is, as HPB says in a footnote, Mara is in exoteric religions a demon and a asura, but in esoteric philosophy it is personified temptation through men's vices, and translated literally means that which kills the soul. It is represented as a king of the Maras, with a crown in which shines a jewel of such lustre that it blinds those who look at it. This lustre referring, of course, to the fascination exercised by vice upon certain natures. And the first section ends by saying, and now rest neath the Bodhi tree, which is perfection of all knowledge. For know thou art the master of Samadhi, the stage of faultless vision. Behold, thou hast become the light, thou hast become the sound, thou art thy master and thy God, thou art thyself the object of thy search, the voice unbroken, that resounds throughout eternities, exempt from change, from sin exempt, the seven sounds in one, the voice of the silence. Om Tat Sat. So now on to Fragment 2. So in Fragment 2 we are introduced to the teaching regarding the two paths, that of the head and the heart. The head being merely intellectual learning, whereas the heart is the intuitional understanding, and is said to proceed from Gautama Buddha's heart. They are the paths of the Pratyeka Buddha and the Bodhisattva, respectively, which I mentioned earlier. HBB states in a footnote that the path of the Pratyeka Buddha is a selfish one, because those on this path are focused on gaining enlightenment for themselves and are caught up in this great dire-heresy of separateness, whereas the Bodhisattva is concerned with the welfare of humanity as a whole. Subsequent teachings that have come from the East since then, Buddhist sutras, etc., confirm this, although at the time certain people contradicted it, because not enough was known about Buddhist teaching. The Bodhisattva path is connected more to the Mahayana Buddhism, the great vehicle, and the path of the Pratyeka Buddha to the Hinayana or Theravada, the lesser vehicle. The voice tells us that both are of merit, but the time comes when we must choose one or the other. This whole fragment is based upon the practice of compassion and developing love for all beings. We are told that to retire from the world to live in a cave and indulge in supreme ascetic practices is not required, and is in fact selfish. It will not result in the kind of spiritual progress that the voice teaches. On the whole, this is true, but I think that although this is generally true, there are people who go to live in the wilds whose whole attention is placed on the welfare of humanity, and vice versa, those who live in the world, in the cities, who are totally self-centred. Because really it comes down to a state of mind, and not external surroundings. In Buddhism, to enter the homeless state is referring to a state of consciousness, and not necessarily to physically leaving home, though many take it literally and leave their families, etc. But those who leave others to pursue their own progress are proving themselves self-centred and lacking in compassion. So this section contains some of my favourite lines in the voice, which I often think about and meditate upon, and they have so much deep meaning. And a couple of these are: have patience, candidate, as one who fears no failure, courts no success. Fix thy soul's gaze upon the star whose ray thou art, the flaming star that shines within the lightless depths of ever being, the boundless fields of the unknown. To me, those are very inspiring lines, especially have patience, candidate, as one who fears no failure, courts no success. And the second is, have perseverance, as one who doth for evermore endure. Thy shadows live and vanish. That which in thee shall live forever, that which in thee knows. For it is knowledge, is not a fleeting life. 'Tis the man that was, that is, and will be, for whom the hour shall never strike. So it is a wonderful awakening to realise that we are eternal beings who will never die, just shedding our bodies like worn-out coats, as the Bhagavad Gita tells us. So when our outermost vehicle follows the natural laws of birth, maturity, old age and death, we lay it aside for greater freedom. We know that despite the physical changes we go through, inwardly we are always the same. If we can grasp the fact that we evermore endure, then this is the most precious thing that we can realise. Because as H.P. Blavatsky says, immortality is but one's unbroken consciousness. This is a great hope for us all, and the one thing we should be trying to become aware of and to teach to others. Just that basic idea. Because that's what people want. They don't want too many complex teachings about rounds and races, etc. They will come later. But to get them interested, we have to make them aware that we are immortal beings within. And our shadows, our personal selves, just come and go, like waves on the ocean, like bubbles in a stream, like a flash of lightning in a summer cloud. So that's why the Diamond Sutra says that it is of more value to teach just 4 lines of the sutra than to give all the wealth in the universe in charity. So this section ends with the words that I alluded to earlier. He who becomes Pratyeka Buddha makes his obeisance but to his self. The Bodhisattva who has won the battle, who holds the prize within his palm, yet says in his divine compassion, for others' sake this great reward I yield. And he accomplishes the greater renunciation. A saviour of the world is he. Behold, the goal of bliss and the long path of woe are at the furthest end. Thou canst choose either, O aspirant to sorrow, throughout the coming cycles. Om Vajrapani Hum. And now to Fragment 3. So this section brings in the teachings of the 7 portals that we have to pass through on our journey. Symbolically, these are the same as the 6 paramitas of Buddhism, with a 7th added, which I think provides the balance. And this is Viraga. So they are Dana, the key of charity and love immortal. Shila, the key of harmony in word and act. The key that counterbalances the cause and the effect and leaves no further room for karmic action. Kshanti, patience sweet that naught can ruffle. Virag, indifference to pleasure and to pain, illusion conquered, truth alone perceived. virya, the energy that fights its way to the supernal truth out of the mire of lies terrestrial. Jnana, whose golden gate once opened, leads the Najan towards the realm of Sat Eternal and its ceaseless contemplation. Prajna, the key to which it makes of a man a god, creating him a bodhisattva, son of the Jnanis. Instructions are given on how to pass through these portals. The essence of these is to remain focused on the self, the divine self, and to recognise it in others. To become aware of the oneness of all things. Also many warnings are given and pitfalls mentioned, all helping us to become more focused. It is essential, firstly, on our theosophical journey to understand our true nature, which is eternal and unchanging, and to realise that all beings share that same nature. Some people say that the voice of the silence is far too advanced for the ordinary student, but there is advice and guidance in it for everyone, no matter whether beginners or more advanced. It was released to the general public, so it was meant for the ordinary man or woman in the street, as well as advanced students. As HPB once wrote, the 6 and 10 transcendental virtues, the paramitas, are not for full-grown adepts or yogis and priests alone, but for all those who would enter the path. The 6 and 10 transcendental virtues, the paramitas, are not for full-grown yogis and priests alone, but for all those who would enter the path. And I read somewhere that the Buddhist sutras, all the Buddhist sutras are esoteric because it depends upon which level you read them. You can read them on the lowest level where they become just exoteric and can lead to just exoteric understanding and interpretations. But at the highest level, they convey something that's very deep and very esoteric. And the same can be true of the voice of the silence, the secret doctrine, the key to Theosophy, and lots of other spiritual works, the Bhagavad Gita, and many, many more. We Theosophists are called seveners, so we can say there are 7 levels to everything that we read or study or meditate on. So, over the next few days, I'm hoping to look at meditating on some key verses from the Voice of the Silence. I think there'll be 10 in all. We're just going to look at. So if you'd like to, you can join me for that if you like. Hopefully 1 or 2 people will. And I'll do a meditation. I'll read the verses, do a meditation, and then do a little commentary on what I think I got from my meditations on that particular thing. So thank you very much for watching, and see you very, very soon. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings.